Welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Our co-hosts, Shri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers in store, online, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Shri and Peter.
Hi, and welcome once again to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. I want to thank our audience as we just crossed 300 organic followers on LinkedIn. So thank you for all the love and all the clicks, likes, and your comments, and for engaging with us. We're also well on our way to 2,000 organic downloads of our podcast alone on Apple. So I want to thank you for the love on that one as well. And we start looking across the spectrum of all the 17 platforms we are on. We're well on our way to much bigger numbers. So I cannot say thank you one more time to everyone. And today we have a very special guest who is now what I would call a brick and mortar turned e-commerce veteran. Yes. Why do I say veteran? Because she's been in this journey of e-commerce pretty much since when I started the journey of e-commerce. Much more to come. But first, I want to welcome the legend of CRM, loyalty, and ratings and reviews, and a longtime ally in the journey of CPG transformation of mine, Mr. Bond.
Shri, you are the R2 to my 3PO, the Mac to my cheese, the pen to my teller. Always a pleasure to join you on this journey.
Later on, we got to talk about the mac and cheese portion because I'm a pizza guy.
Very good.
So this week, we're going to get into a myriad of topics, and we're going to really hunker down on an expertise within e-commerce called omnichannel, which is in the news these days as click and collect. And no better than an expert in that business. We welcome today the GM from the Emerson Group for e-commerce, Anu herself. And Anu, would you take a few minutes and, you've worked with me in the past, so I'm also, these podcasts are extra special when we have guests that we've actually worked with from a past life. And we've built omnichannel together for J&J, starting with Walmart.com. So would you take a few seconds and introduce yourself for our audience?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So as Shri said, I'm Anu Bliss. I would say I'm a CPG veteran of 18 years at J&J and now the general manager for e-commerce practice at the Emerson Group. Believe it or not, Shri, and I don't know if you know this, but in the late 90s, I worked for what was called a .com, which was around email messaging called mail.com. But I think now we would brand it as a startup. And I actually kind of forgot about that for a while. So you used to actually have to pay for domain names. And before the advent of Gmail and Yahoo, we had doctor.com and india.com and did a lot of B2B work there. And I worked with the original Cheetah Mail back in the day. So it's funny how it's come full circle for me because then I moved I had a life change. I had a baby. I moved out of New York City, moved to New Jersey and said, hey, I heard these big pharmaceutical companies and CPG companies have great benefits and daycare. So that sounds like it'll be great for me. And, grew up, I was buying corrugate for displays, very glamorous work back in the day. And kind of learned the operations side, which was good. Then moved into various sales and marketing roles and shopper marketing before it was called that. I think we used to call it platform manager. Really got my teeth in the food class of trade. I have a strong affinity for regional food. I think they do a lot of smart work and really connect with their shoppers. Your shoppers in that store twice a week, or at least during non-COVID times, right? And then Shri recruited me when he came from PepsiCo, and there was I'm sure you know this, Shri, but it was not easy for J&J to fill that position, and we kept hearing that they were soon going to hire a VP for e-com. And Shri took the bait and recruited me, and he showed me. I don't know if you remember this, but the first time we met, he showed me a slide with different boxes. One said Amazon. One said B2B, one said digital shelf, and one said omnichannel. And he asked me a very simple question. He said, where do you see yourself fit? And I didn't know. I said, I want to be part of any of it. And that wasn't a great answer, but I just knew that I I needed to be doing things differently. I was calling on Bed Bath & Beyond, selling health and beauty to Harmon. And while it was a great gig, I knew that we had to do things differently. I knew the shopper was moving online and that we weren't necessarily prepared for it. I also felt like if I could do it, then I could show my peers, that grew up with me in the brick and mortar space, that they could do it too. So, I think there's always this mysticism or magic around us in CPG e-commerce, and really it's more about focus, right? And having intellectual curiosity. So, Shri came back and said, okay, how about omni-channel? And, we want you on the omni-channel team. We want you to lead it. And I went back to my desk and I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, I was like, yes, but I had no idea. So sometimes leap of faith, really is, it takes that. Like, I think the lesson there is you don't always have to know the exact answer or how you're going to get there. But the fact that he was willing to take a risk on me, knew I had relationships with the field, knew there was going to be some influence, and also understanding going in, having been into retailers' doors, kind of understanding the talk, the language, and being able to relate to people to drive change. I think it was at that point, it was more about the psychology behind it than the tactics. Sri, I don't know if you agree with that.
Thinking back, Anu, so you started your career in like what we would call a startup world, mail.com. Then you evolved to working with corrugated display inside what is arguably one of the world's largest companies, Johnson & Johnson. Eventually in your journey, I know you've called on customers and you've been on the Ahold team as an example. Correct me if I'm wrong, if my memory serves me right. You've been on many other teams and you've touched many things within as classic retail sales as one can imagine, like customer business models for brands. Then you started omnichannel 6-7 years ago, whenever we did that, and you evolved to being the omnichannel leader, like starting up the omnichannel business for Johnson & Johnson, to now being the GM of e-commerce for Emerson. So how does one do that? And can you also take us into the world of what does GM of e-commerce at Emerson mean? Like what happened? What is a day in the life every single day?
Sure. So I think one of the interesting things, and was very different in the model than we saw on a typical customer team at Johnson & Johnson, was our roles ended up becoming kind of interchangeable, right? So everybody had to understand the Amazon ecosystem. Everybody kind of had to understand 3P and marketplace. It didn't mean that's what you were doing for a living, but it meant we had to become very well versed. I think there was one point you said, you're in charge of digital shelf. And I'm like, at first you think, I didn't sign up for that. And then you said, I have to understand those tactics because they will translate. So, not that this was your question, and we'll get to that, but I think making sure you have those players that can be interchangeable, that have that curiosity and don't think these are the 5 tasks I have to do every day, becomes a really important quality. After a few years on the US team, I ended up moving over to global, and I'd always had this idea or like romantic notion that I should work in global. I actually, when I started in business school, I went to a school in Arizona called Thunderbird, which was, international business management. And back then in the 90s, there was a specific school for that. Now, most universities and business schools have that as part of their curriculum. So I'm aging myself, but I wanted to really learn about why the e-commerce penetration was so high in Asia, and figured how I could try to translate it to our other markets to accelerate. Because the goal for us was always, how do we accelerate? How do we become faster? How do we become better at meeting our shoppers' needs? And I did something that was quite painful. I filled in for somebody who was on maternity leave, who was based in Shanghai. And I say painful because I didn't move there for 6 months. I had to manage with a 12-hour time difference. And, in funny news, it's sometimes marketing teams that didn't necessarily want to focus on conversion used to have calls at 3:00 in the morning, knowing that I wouldn't be able to join. It wasn't without challenges, but what I didn't understand, and I got so excited about my travels to Asia and to Shanghai in particular. I wrote a LinkedIn blog about it, and I said, they have contactless payments. They have live streaming and social commerce. You can't pay with a credit card. I got thrown out of a cab because my QR code on my phone didn't work. And I'm like, this is amazing. And what I didn't understand was that this all evolved very quickly because of SARS and MERS. And I think now with COVID in the US, I'm understanding we're also looking for those same solutions, right?
What an interesting perspective.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So just to circle back, this opportunity came up at Emerson to be the general manager. And, I have to say, Shri, I've taken much of your playbook, evolved with what we know now, 5 and 6 years later. And I'm developing pillars around, where we should be focusing. The team was very focused on Amazon, which made sense for scale and for learning. Emerson is, it's a very special company in the sense that the heart of our company is built on relationships with in-store people. And sure. We have an incredible logistics network and many emerging brands and private equity brands that don't necessarily have a sales force or a way to distribute product come to Emerson for those relationships. So then how do you evolve a team that's so built on relationships to understanding that magic will not work with Amazon? Like, going out and having coffee with the buyer or the vendor manager.
Anu, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. I am quite familiar with Emerson Group because I worked with them when I was at CBS. Your colleague, Brian Schaefer, was my key contact. I think I frustrated him a great deal because all of the portfolio companies that you invested in and he represented, a lot of them were in categories that CBS deemed as let's just call it red-faced, that people didn't like to talk too much about.
Shy to buy, right?
Exact. Shy to buy is the best way to describe it. And as much as he wanted to invest in personalization, the merchandising group wasn't interested in doing it. So I'm a big fan of your company, and I understand the business. I want to take you back to your role at J&J, which was a global role. I'd really love to know how you manage e-commerce from a global perspective. What are kind of the responsibilities that you were invested in overseeing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so, the challenge with a highly matrixed organization is always, how do you influence without authority in some ways, but how do you get everybody kind of rallied around the same purpose? And, one way was, to institute frameworks.
Takeaway number one from Miss Anu herself: influencing without authority. Go on.
That's right. Yeah. So, the way you have to appeal to different markets that have different needs, all kind of going towards the same goal, which was how do we accelerate faster? How do we make sure that our brands are showing up where she's shopping? Those are the goals. So it broke down to 101. What's our vision? What's our mission? Getting everybody rallied around the same cause. But then, every region and every market says they're special, and they are. Or my shopper is different, or my brands are different than the ones that you're selling here. So it was really around, how do we develop a framework for people to live into so that we could be speaking in the same language, so to speak. And also, there's a lot of magic in being able to see what works in one market and scaling the best of breed to others so that you could leapfrog your learnings. And especially in the case with Amazon, what happens in the US then happens in Canada, then happens in Mexico, then happens in Germany. And it's like clockwork. So one of the really valuable and powerful things, that we instituted there were share groups within the organization. And I would encourage any of you, whether it be through a WhatsApp chat group or, an informal share group, we're in such a special space and time where people are still really willing to share and try to get through the journey together, and Shri and I are part of a chat group where
I was about to say that.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I mean,
No,
a lot
please.
of non-competes, a lot of food categories, and I learned so much about what tactics work and don't, or how to get contacts in certain areas, or heads up on news that I might not come across. And it's been incredibly helpful. And I really feel like our community in e-commerce, particularly in CPG, we're a very sharing group because we know we cannot do it by ourselves. And I found this time to be very unique.
Sharing is caring. Shri,
That's right. It sounds so basic, but it's actually helped me leapfrog my knowledge.
Shri, another takeaway, we need to start a WhatsApp chat group for all of our previous guests. It'll be a very exclusive community.
Can't wait for it. So big takeaway for Peter today, WhatsApp. So I want to go back to omnichannel. It's a much maligned word, much misused word. It's all over the place. When I say omnichannel, I'm not referring to the shopper. The shopper's been omnichannel for over a decade. I don't think we can argue. When the smartphone was invented in 2008-9, people were already omnichannel then because they were browsing things online and Instagram, Facebook, whatever the case was, forever. And Google has existed for like 2 decades at this stage. So I want to go to the retail side of omnichannel, which largely is thought of these days as Walmart.com, it's Target.com, CVS.com, and X.com, Meijer.com, depending on the category someone is in. And I've always perceived it in my own learnings as a very difficult role, and growing the omni-channel business, which is largely click and collect and home delivery for a very established large retailer that has hundreds and thousands of stores, is a very tough job. How did you approach that tough role, and how did you actually bring success for Johnson & Johnson in that omni-channel learning? How hard was this? Am I overthinking this? Is this a cakewalk?
Not a cakewalk. It took a lot of work, boots on the ground. I put a lot of miles on my frequent flyer card the first year or 18 months. I'd say, I think you have to come from a place of humility and go and talk to retailers. That's how we started the journey, right?
Amen.
So talk to the retailers, find out what's important to them and what they need help with. And I think we have big opportunities still as manufacturer partners around how we help with inventory positions, click and collect. Fantastic, right? I can start selling heavy items and not worry about shipping costs because the shopper is coming and picking up in store. Fantastic. Are we giving enough information to our retailers on assortment and really looking at our, you're all familiar with the power code list from, traditional CPG. Have we, I would say there's a lot of opportunity for us to segment between what should go from ship to home, what should show up for click and collect. It's basic block and tackle, but it would help address profitability immensely. I'm trying to think of what else really makes sense here. Oh yeah, we were talking about inventory. So we're sourcing from front of store. What does that mean? And how are manufacturers able to help with that? I think that's something that I see retailers, specifically grocery retailers, they're struggling with it. And I think they're looking to us to provide an answer. And I haven't seen a good one yet. I think that's where we need to get to really be good partners to our retailers.
Cool. Hey, so let's broaden this out. We talked a lot about these specific retailers in Omni. If I look at Amazon or Walmart Omni or direct to consumer or Instacart, I'm really curious if that's big on your radar. But there's a lot. Where do you think companies should be really investing for growth, and is it on a category by category basis from your perspective?
That's a good question. I think we need to invest in growth for grocery, and I don't think that's a magical answer. I think everybody understands that. I do think manufacturers are still struggling with how to do it. Obviously things have exploded with COVID. I think a few years ago, pre-COVID, I used to say anywhere where we can co-promote so that a retailer can get that information out that, hey, we have this service was very positive. Like if we could have said, I'll make one up, Johnson's Baby and CVS.com, pick up, drive up and pick up curbside. To me, that was an important way to invest. Now that we've kind of, that lack of knowledge has been removed, meaning shoppers are very aware of click and collect now. So I think that awareness is already there. What are the other ways that we can partner to make it easy? And I think, recently I just posted an article. I think we still have this barrier, like the economics of e-commerce are broken. We need to really do a deep dive into those economics when it comes to profitability. And I think that's where manufacturers should be investing to help our retailers.
My personal opinion on that one, I think the whole notion of, a previous conversation we had on another podcast today, very similar, what makes e-commerce unprofitable? And I think it's in our minds because we're used to a certain brand P&L, and that brand P&L meant we were never in the business of retail. E-commerce is the business of retail. All of a sudden, if you do D2C or you're participating in the business of fulfillment with the retailer, which you've traditionally outsourced to a retailer and they've managed it on their P&L, of course, that's going to be a larger investment. That doesn't necessarily make it less profitable. It's a mindset shift and getting used to a new way of doing business in my eyes. Not right for everybody, but right for some. But I think at the end of the day, the consumer makes that decision. And those that keep complaining about the item level economics, and that's why they won't get into e-commerce, I think those are the ones that are going to really suffer. But I want to switch. Sorry,
Sri. I'm hearing that. I'm still hearing that conversation with some of the, maybe less mature brands or brands that are towards the end of their life cycle. They are struggling with it, and so,
yep.
I think the more that we can make that clear, or the more we can break it down and say, hey, you're paying for lights in the store, like compare it with, whatever those other costs are around packaging. I think that will be a really big breakthrough if we could show that.
And Anu, I deal with this a lot because I do consulting work now for brands, and I see this it's really I would call a problem with senior leaders and large mature brands who have been around forever because they're used to a certain P&L, and the ecosystem of EBITDA quarterly requires a certain number to be delivered for them to be measured as successful or judged as successful and unsuccessful. The one conversation that I find, though, that brands don't want to have because of the ecosystem that they built is you're paying for the lights at a retailer, like you said. That's part of the co-op. Whether you want to accept it or not, it's part of their trade rate. But when your business is shifting from keeping that lights on in the store to a different way of fulfillment, should you be investing the same co-op in a shrinking business in store to keep lights on when you're not as relevant? But think about transferring those dollars over into this new way called e-commerce, or this modern way called e-commerce. But I want to shift our conversation into a different area, Anu, because I know you've led this area. In that global role at Johnson & Johnson, you were responsible for global footprints and capabilities. In 2020, and I know that wasn't an easy job because you got to corral multiple countries to come and create common platforms. But that said, in 2020, if we look across the spectrum of capabilities, there's obviously the early stage ones of content and SEO, and then you mature into retail media, AMG, WMG, the whole gamut, and then there's ratings and reviews. Which ones are clutch in 2020? Is it ratings and reviews? Is it all of it? Like, what should a brand do?
From a global perspective?
Or just from everyday business?
I think that we cannot emphasize enough the power of the one-to-one contact and the user-generated content that comes from ratings and reviews. And as much as we harp on that, it's
everybody says that to us, Peter. I don't know if they're just researching you and they're seeing power reviews, but everybody, like clockwork, has said that is the most powerful.
No, seriously.
It's very I think I can say it till I'm blue in the face, but it's very underutilized. And, Peter, if you can help the community with how else to position that, this user-generated content is a big deal. And especially if you look in Asia, I mean, it is very common to have 5,000, it's a review culture, 5,000, 10,000 reviews. And if there is any issue and any negative review, they'll have banks of people, especially I was in Changsha, and they actually put a customer service company in a college town so that they could flex the workforce based on holiday time periods, right? They turn negative interactions into positive ones within minutes.
The data that we see says that if you take someone who filed a complaint or registered something problem with your product and you respond to it and you satisfy it, they will become one of your strongest brand advocates because you recognized it, you addressed it, and they will advocate on your behalf because of it. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, because you prove that you care about them. There's no mystery there. And it's like our process here that I see in the US is quite clunky, right? There are opportunities with retailers to answer, but not real time necessarily. And that's what I've seen. I think answering anyway, like in a QA, is great. It's just we can take it a step further, and that's something that I saw in Asia time and again that really was a game changer.
To me, I've always felt, we can push for e-com, which obviously in these days it's non-negotiable. But to me, the core DNA of e-com is not necessarily that. No offense to Amazon, it's not that relationship with 1P at Amazon, because it 1P at Amazon mirrors 1P at Walmart in store. It's a contract. You're negotiating trade rates and co-ops. Your shopper marketing becomes retail media, and you're worried about your chargebacks, your deductions, blah, 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 blah. To me, the success criteria for any brand for e-commerce is capabilities. Do you have a solid foundation? Because if you don't, good luck.
Yeah. Hey, Anu, with respect to this term omni-channel, I'd really love your feedback on, is it real, or is it from a retailer perspective? Is it real, or is it just, oh, look, I'm doing omni-channel, and it makes it sound like they're doing it? Is it a facade? What are your thoughts on that overall?
I think the concept made sense. It was my job title, so I spent a lot of time explaining what that meant. In the early days, I think where we have to morph to is start talking O to O, right? Online to offline. How do you use e-commerce as a brand builder online to actually improve your presence in store? And I think as we see, I know an announcement came out just today about the Walmart buyers being one. Target's been on that journey for a while. Yep. We'll see that more and more. And I think, the more that our merchandise or in-store or omni buyers at these retailers care about what's happening online, I think that omni-channel term will kind of disappear in a way, and we'll talk more O to O.
I think from the consumer's perspective, particularly with the brands that Emerson has, content, to your point on ratings and reviews, but just beyond that, how the product's used, everything else like that. If that isn't reaching consumers who are shopping the store, my warning to any retailer is, if you're not going to provide them that content, there are these guys in Seattle that'll do it while you're in the store, and they'll just pluck that shopper out.
You got it.
They're in your store.
Short form video, price. People, like you said, we have many shy to buy brands, and I think people they don't want to ask the store manager.
No, they won't. And they need to find it. And
they need to find it, and they need to be able to search. And, I have to say, I'm doing a lot of foundation work right now. It's we have many disparate brands, and trying to figure out how to make it easier for them and make sure we're engaging with the right partners to do that, to help syndicate the content.
I think there are just too many category managers that don't understand how their physical store sales are being impacted by a lack of digital capabilities around content and experience, because people all walk into the store with one of these, and it's not just to make phone calls.
I feel, Peter, that's a disease to which there's no cure, because that's largely that way because of syndicated data. brands are measuring their success benchmarks by tracking 50% of their sales footprint, which is what syndicated data gives you. And you and I come from those syndicated data ecosystems, so I don't mean to poo-poo on it, because I'm still thankful that I spent multiple years at IRI learning the basics of the consumer goods industry. But that's the reality. Like, that's what the Capman has in their hands. Like, and they're really fighting to maintain share. And they're not looking beyond those classic drivers of TPR and display as the and possibly what the competitive environment is doing in TPR and display. So I think that's the reason. But Anu, speaking of competitive environment, display, in store, let's go to field teams for a second. And obviously now in the last quarter, unless you're in hygiene or you're in health, or you're in very fast-moving food and bev, produce, fish, things of that nature, meats, etc., your business has taken a hit in store in the last 3 months. There's no ifs, buts, maybes. It could be $1 million, it could be $5 million, it could be 10 million or 100 million, depending on the size of your business model and your brand scale. And so for the first time, I'm pretty sure, of course, there's always going to be naysayers and people are going to say, oh, this is a temporary phase and e-commerce is rubbish and hogwash and everybody cannot wait to go back in store and push and go back to the Black Friday stampedes that we love in this country. But there's a certain population in the field teams who are going to say, I now need to evolve my career and get involved in e-commerce. You evolved in your career from calling on Ahold and I use Ahold just as an example because you've touched many customers, and you evolved to e-commerce. What is your advice for the field teams?
My advice is to let go of your ego and talk to your e-commerce team.
Number 4.
Talk to your e-commerce team and ask them questions and become their advocate, because e-commerce people need help. We need as many evangelists as we can have throughout the company and believers. And e-commerce people will teach you anything. I think I always say that if you sign up for an e-commerce role in CPG, you're a teacher, you're a salesperson, you're a marketer, you're a therapist, right? So it's
therapist.
They're willing to teach. We're all willing to teach. We love to teach. We want to share what we know. We want to know what you know, because we have that intellectual curiosity, and that's why we've come here. And we need as many people who can get on the bus with us as possible. So, unfortunately, ego gets in all of our way. And especially if you've had a very successful career selling in brick and mortar, you think, why would I change that? I've had 20, 30 years here, but, just ask questions. There's nothing to be afraid of.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I remember I got into e-commerce not because I chose it or because I wanted to. It's because I was asked at Frito-Lay to be on that team and start it up. And my first knee-jerk reaction was my CPG career is over because I'm leaving the brick and mortar ecosystem. And I literally our net sales in e-com at Frito then was 0.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Hey, so along this lines of advice for field sales and thinking about that, you clearly have a wealth of experience. You've got the frequent flyer miles, I should say, to prove it. I'm curious about what you do proactively to help mentor people to move into these kinds of roles, and how you, because for Shri and I, we do this podcast not just to tease each other, but honestly to help educate and bring transparency to kind of what the space. So we're kind of curious as to what you do from that perspective.
Can you get into the DNA of e-commerce therapy, as you said, e-commerce therapist?
So I spend a lot of my time reaching out to folks within my company and also with outside to talk to them about what piques their interest about e-commerce. And, I tell them, look in the mirror and see, if you've already called on Wegmans and Ahold and Bed Bath & Beyond like me, I took a look at my skill set and said, what am I missing? And this might be a kind of a pessimistic way to look at things, but I always think if I'm out on the street, what are the skill sets that I need that would make me attractive to an employer? It sounds so basic, but, understanding how to function in e-commerce and just digital marketing in general, for me, I knew that would be an important skill set to have. And, so I just try to share, what my journey was, because yes, I took a risk. I think Sri was saying, he thought, oh, his career was over, but actually it just began, right? So it time and again, it turns out that when you take a risk in your journey, it ends up opening many, many doors for you.
So true. So I want to go back a little bit to global. So here in the US, we tend to be wrong or right. We tend to be a little myopic because this is a very large consumption market and one can build an entire career focusing just on this market. But when we look at digital, earlier you had mentioned about how your first visit to China and Shanghai, especially, you're like, wow, payments, you don't even need to touch anything. You don't need to whip out a credit card and cash is not even in play. And you were kicked out of a cab when your WhatsApp didn't work. So when we start looking at external markets, and you've been a great coach for me on international markets, talking to me about how Japan functions or how Tesco works, etc. I had a question. Should somebody working exclusive in US retail, is the world of e-commerce, just because a website is truly global, is it really global? And should one, because the action for digital largely is outside of the United States, should one expand their horizons to think about a global career focus outside the US, or is there plenty of action here?
Look, there's plenty of action here, but it always makes you smarter, in my opinion, to be exposed to other markets. And, we shouldn't have such a myopic view. And Sri, I think that was the word that I saw come across earlier with some questions. But what can you take? What can you learn and improve on? And good ideas come from anywhere, everywhere. And we need to really realize in the U.S. that in many ways, some of these other markets are far beyond us. And maybe it was because of need. Maybe it's because they were quarantined in their homes. But there's a whole lot going on when it comes to e-commerce that's probably 4 or 5, 6 years beyond what's happening in the US. And hey, you look like a genius if you've seen the future and can bring it back to your own market.
Yeah, there's this whole measurement system outside of the US called the metric system. And sorry,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Peter's Canadian.
Don't get me started. Listen, my last question for you is really about, and I think I know the answer, but you made the shift from a more traditional field sales brick and mortar role into e-commerce. Did you make the right decision, and how do you evangelize if you think you did?
100% I made the right decision. I think it's opened up a whole different world and honestly has linked me back to my roots, right? I think one of the reasons I'm successful is because of the empathy factor. I've walked in those shoes. I can relate to those buyers. I can relate to other salespeople who grew up just the way I did and help, at the end of the day, when you wake up in the morning, it's how have I helped somebody every day? That's what I think about. How can I help somebody today? Beyond thinking about myself. And so, of course, I absolutely made the right decision. I think when it comes to job satisfaction, being able to make an impact on other people is the thing that's most valuable to me.
Well, clearly in e-commerce, being a high-touch role, no matter what you do in e-commerce, the ability to influence others as well as make an impact on others is significant. And we are out of time for today, and that's what happens again when you have a passionate conversation about topics you love. I want to remind our listeners and our audience that you can catch all our episodes and all our content by following us on LinkedIn at Consumer Engagement in an Omni-Channel World. As I mentioned at the start of this episode, we want to thank you for all the clicks, likes, and love you've shown us by following us. Our organic followership on LinkedIn as well as on our Apple podcasts, it started to multiply in exponential numbers, and Peter and I cannot thank you enough. Our mission remains the same, was the same, which is to see the transformation, a progressive transformation of the CPG industry, both brand and retail, so we can continue to deliver quality products at value for the consumer. On that note, Peter, I want to thank you week over week for coming here, sharing your views and engaging with our audience and our guests. And Anu, thank you so much for bringing these valuable points on the evolution of a career from field sales, brick and mortar, into e-commerce, to omni-channel leadership, to global. None of those were easy roles, but I'm sure our audience appreciates listening into what they can do to evolve themselves. And I would say they have no choice. So thank you, everybody. And we'll catch you again next week. And while you're at it, we would love for you to rate us and review us. tinyurl.com/Apple CPG podcast. That's where you'd find this podcast on Apple and 17 other platforms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPGGUYS LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPGGUYS LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPGGUYS LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPGGUYS LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.